What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, July 22nd edition of the Ship My Money Show Tournament Thoughts Edition. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. We have 9 MLB games tonight. We already did the game-by-game walkthrough this morning, looking at the best overall plays from each game. If you missed that, it is on the Endgame YouTube channel. But on this show, going to take a look through what my exposures would look like if the slate had started right now, or realistically like 20 minutes ago. We did get a few lineups since I ran this stuff. I'll try and highlight on anything that's changed between what I have and guys that maybe aren't playing. We did get the Red Sox lineup and the Mariners lineup. Those were both lineups that I mentioned this morning. I thought were going to be really important as far as adding some strategy to tonight's slate. So I will talk through those, even though they weren't out when I built these lineups. But going to go more position by position, stack by stack on this show than on the early show, taking a look at what I would be getting to. Again, if I'm not getting to somebody that you like, it doesn't mean they're a bad play. You can make good lineups around pretty much any individual player. It's just how things are shaping up for me, the way that things are getting combined so that I can play what I think are really good lineups in tournaments. So starting with the pitching here on DraftKings, again, this is a DraftKings specific show. It would require twice as much prep and take twice as long to talk about if I did the same thing for FanDuel. So this is obviously one spot that is just going to be drastically different than FanDuel, where you are rostering 2 pitchers on DraftKings. But very heavily, we can see prioritizing Hunter Green here. This is out of 50 lineups. If I were entering them in the large field flagship tournament right now, I would have a lot of Hunter Green. He's projected for about 33% ownership. That is the highest ownership projection for a pitcher on the slate. I think it's warranted at this $8,200 price tag. I do think he's going a little bit over-owned individually, but that's not something that necessarily is a big issue at pitcher for me. And I'm still getting to him more than the field, even though he is showing up as optimal like 25% of the time for me instead of 33. I'm still not having trouble building low enough owned lineups, contrarian enough lineups around him. The Braves are banged up. They obviously are missing Acuna. They've been missing him. They've been missing Harris. Now you have Ozzy Albies injured as well. He is out for the next couple of months. This lineup has just gotten pretty weak, especially, by Brave standards. They have strikeouts in it. They've lost a lot of their legitimate power bats. And then you have Hunter Green, who has the second highest strikeout percentage on this slate behind Cole Reagans. He's $800 less expensive than Reagans. He probably has a better matchup than Reagans, all things considered, when, Reagans is facing a healthy Arizona team in a park that is difficult to get strikeouts in Kansas City. So I'm getting to a lot of Hunter Green here, and then just finding ways to be different elsewhere. And that's perfectly fine with me. Again, one of the most talented pitchers on the slate. I'm also getting to a lot of Blake Snell. This one is scarier, but you can pretty easily see, why you can pretty easily make the case for Snell in tournaments at the very least, even if it's not a spot that you personally want to go to. It's a spot that, feels a little bit too risky to you given the very difficult matchup against the Dodgers in a hitter-friendly park. But Blake Snell is $7,500. And we have a lot of good pitching on this slate. We don't have a lot of elite pitching, especially in the way of strikeouts. I mentioned Reagans at the top as far as strikeout percentage this season. Hunter Green is second. Blake Snell is third, albeit in a limited sample. He started the season late. He missed some time with injury. But we know what Blake Snell is as a major league pitcher, and it's nowhere close to a $7,500 pitcher. So whatever concerns you have about this game being in Dodger Stadium or facing the Dodgers, specifically, a lot of that's alleviated by the fact that Blake Snell, from a talent standpoint, is like a 9K plus guy. 7,500 alleviates a lot of those concerns. It alleviates a lot of the concerns around, he doesn't go deep into games. He's not pitch efficient. He walks too many guys. He strikes out a ton of guys. And between that, he isn't going to work deep into the game. But at 7,500, I don't really care all that much. And then the thing that really stands out is that if you click over to this tab here, what I did here was just simply build 5,000 lineups with my projections. And it's going to give me a decent feel for what players I think are over-owned or under-owned. And Blake Snell, projected for around 10% ownership, showed up as optimal 17% of the time for me. Now, maybe that means his ownership projection is just too low, and it's actually, in reality, going to be higher. But an underpriced Blake Snell at 10%, it's just, I think, a pretty easy way to differentiate. So again, if we're to get closer to lock and that ownership projection gets up closer to 20%, then my Blake Snell is going to start decreasing. Maybe my Hunter Green starts decreasing as well, because with Snell at 10% owned, that's a perfect guy for me to pair with Hunter Green. I'm getting a really high ceiling, but not taking on a ton of ownership with Snell. So he looks like a really useful piece to me. I'm getting quite a bit over the field on him. Spencer Arrighetti, good strikeout matchup against Oakland. Obviously, they're a dangerous offense. Arrighetti does have good strikeout stuff, though. 25% K percentage this year. Oakland is one of the easiest teams to strike out. He does walk too many guys. He gives up power, but this ballpark will help to mitigate the power, so that's nice. He's projected for around 14% ownership, so I'm getting a little over 2x the field there. I don't have any issue with that. Reynaldo Lopez, the fourth pitcher for me that's showing up in double digits, pretty much in line with the field there. 20% projected ownership. I got the 16%. Pretty good matchup for him against Cincinnati. This is another team that strikes out a lot. It's a reasonable price tag at 9K. He's projected for similar ownership to Cole Reagans. I have him projected similarly as well. But good strikeout matchup for him. He's been a good pitcher overall this year in his return to the starting rotation. 24.5% K percentage, 3.79 xFIP. Happy to get there. And then you see kind of just spreading out exposure to some other guys. The two that I think are really notable here, actually three that I think are really notable, are that I'm not getting much Bryce Miller. I'm not getting much Chandler Halleck. I'm not getting much Cole Reagans. These are all pitchers that if you like them more than Hunter Green and you wanted to take some sort of stand on them, that's perfectly fine. They're good pitchers. Some of them are in good spots. Bryce Miller in a good spot. Good pitchers park. Good matchup against the Angels. Tanner Houck, good matchup against Colorado. Obviously not a good park in Coors Field. And then Cole Reagans, tough matchup against Arizona. Not an easy team to strike out. They do have a lot of good hitters that can do damage against left-handed pitching. Also a difficult park to get strikeouts in, but he's one of the most, if not the most talented pitcher on the slate. So it's not a situation where I'm looking at them getting ownership and saying that I think the field is really wrong. It's more so just that from an upside standpoint, a price standpoint, I'm just getting to a lot of Hunter Green. But taking on Hunter Green's ownership, I'm not going to really want to pair him with a ton of Bryce Miller at 27% or Reagans or Houck at 20%. So I think that's what's kind of driving them down. But, again, if you're just not as high on Hunter Green as I am, then you probably should be getting to more of these other guys that do project well. But that's why I'm not getting there. Is just that I am taking that stand on Hunter Green. I'm perfectly fine with that. I wouldn't hate it if it was, I had the field on Green and then I was closer to the field on those guys. But that's also just why it's working out the way that it is, I think. It's not really a knock on those pitchers. Tyler Anderson, good strikeout matchup. No Julio Rodriguez. Good pitcher's park. Not a very good pitcher. It's just purely, I would assume he's in lineups where I just need to save ownership. Like if we look at what the Tyler Anderson lineups look like, if I'm able to pull that up, getting to Angels, Rockies. So kind of surprised here that like Tyler Anderson would be showing up in this particular lineup just because these hitters aren't really going to be popular either. I thought that I would actually be getting to him in lineups where maybe I'm getting to like the Red Sox. But, either way, it's just a low-owned pitcher that does have a good strikeout matchup against Seattle in a good pitcher's park. Certainly not any sort of a priority, though. And that can be said for all these other guys that I'm getting a little bit of as well. Tobias Myers, Austin Gomber randomly in a lineup that kind of hopefully goes away. Eric Fetty, Bailey Ober. Like these guys are all okay, but not guys that I'm building around. I think that Green is clearly a priority for me and for the field. I think that makes a lot of sense. Arrighetti, Lopez, Snell. I like all of these guys. Stephen Leibowitz said, would you mind two chalkier pitchers with a more contrarian stack? No, it's perfectly fine. Especially, on a 9-game slate like this too. I think that there are going to be there's a couple of teams that I think are going to get a lot of ownership, the Red Sox, the Astros in particular. And then you're just going to have a lot of these teams that have like 4 to 4.5 implied run totals where the ownership is kind of like 5 to 10% across the board. So if you wanted to just go to like a lower owned team and then get to Green plus Houck or Green plus Reagans, whatever it may be, I think that is fine. It's just not the route that I'm going. As Hunter Green chalk ever worked out, I think he had a really good start against Pittsburgh at like massive ownership maybe a couple weeks ago. I think that was like a shorter slate though. So not on a main slate, but yeah, it feels like it doesn't very often, but I'm going right back to it anyway. So that's where I'm getting the pitching here. I think it's a pretty wide open pitching slate, but I'm pretty concentrated, which generally means that I do end up spread out a little bit more on my stacks. And for the most part, that's the case. I am getting to a lot of Philadelphia overall. we can see of the 50 lineups that I'd be playing, 20 of them have at least 2 Phillies bats. Somebody mentioned weather concerns. The Phillies game does have weather issues. They didn't when I looked earlier. So this is a spot where, depending on how that forecast changes between now and lock, I may end up having to walk things back a little bit in this game. When I ran this, I was not accounting for weather issues in this game. But assuming for the sake of this show that weather ends up cooperating, we can see that 20 of the 50 lineups I'll be playing do have at least 2 Phillies bats. 11 have at least 2 Red Sox. Everything else is 10 or less, and pretty spread out. White Sox, Houston, San Francisco, Texas, Oakland, all in the same range, and then it drops off a little bit more. Philly 2-mans, Philly 3-man showing up a lot, so I'm using them as mini stacks a lot. Getting to them as 5-man's a decent amount as well, but I am overall pretty spread out with my stacks, which I do expect. That's generally just how things are going to work out for me. If I'm concentrated at pitcher, generally my stacks are going to be more spread out. If I'm concentrated on a couple of offenses, generally I'm going to be spreading pitching out more. So I'm not really surprised there. If we start going through position by position, at catcher, JT Realmuto only projected for 4% ownership. I'm getting to a lot of him right now. It's not the best park for offense, but as I alluded to before, this is a really weird slate where you have Coors, obviously great hitters park, and the Red Sox are going to get a lot of ownership. You have Oakland, which is not a good hitters park, but I think that Houston is going to get a lot of ownership. But other than that, there's not like great offensive spots. Texas is a good park for home runs. The White Sox don't hit home runs. Texas obviously can do some damage, but it's not like they have a great matchup with Fetty anyway. KC, good offensive park, but not a great park for home runs. And you have Cole Reagans on the mound for KC, so that limits some of the offensive potential in that game. Atlanta, 2 offenses that just aren't really that good and 2 pitchers that are good. So this game actually has one of the higher totals, 4.5 to 5 implied run total for Philly. And right now, at least, just not much ownership projected to come in there. Bailey Ober is a good pitcher, but he will give up home runs. He does struggle with right-handed power in particular. 214 expected ISO allowed to righties since the start of last year. 194 so far this season. I did also, I'm double checking now, but in my pitch type model that tries to measure and adjust for how hitters do against the pitches that pitchers typically throw and also the locations that they like to work in. Some Phillies guys are showing up well in that model for me also. Alec Baum showing up basically at the top of the list. Bryce Harper showing up for me. Realmuto showing up as above average here. Trey Turner slightly above average. So I do think they grade out pretty well in this matchup against Ober. Again, don't love the park, but other than that, I do think they actually look pretty good, especially at low ownership. So JT Realmuto showing up a ton. Also only $4,500. I like that. Connor Wong, obviously going to be popular in Coors Field. Pretty much getting around the field there. I do have some thoughts on that Red Sox lineup that I'll get to at some point in this show, but I'm going to wait until I get through the positions for that one. Patrick Daly, San Francisco. We don't have that lineup, or at least we didn't when I ran these, but he's likely to be hitting in the middle of the order, going up against a pitcher in River Ryan that is a highly regarded pitching prospect. He doesn't have a lot of experience yet. He doesn't project to be lights out at the major league level or anything like that. We're not talking about a Paul Skeens type prospect coming up. We're talking about somebody that probably has a pretty bright future, but right now probably isn't a above average major league pitcher. This is a good hitter's park. Patrick Bailey is very affordable at catcher, probably batting cleanup. Yano Diaz, very fair price tag here for Houston. I do think, and I mentioned this on my show this morning, and I want to see actually how it looks as I reran stuff for this show. I think there's a chance that Houston is going under projected as far as ownership goes. So like 9% projected ownership coming into Yano Diaz, about a 12% chance of being optimal, and he correlates with guys like Altuve and Bregman and Alvarez that I think are going to be popular. If industry ownership holds how it is, I probably will manually bump my Houston ownership projections a little bit, because I think Houston right now is just setting up as a team that gets kind of steamed because such a high percentage of players use Sims and have a similar process to me. And when a team just shows up as being underowned, a lot of times their actual ownership ends up coming in higher than expected. I think Philly is also a team that could end up happening to. So that is something that I want to pay attention to. JT Realmuto. If we go back here and look at like the optimal percentage for Realmuto, though, he only showed up as optimal like 5% of the time for me. He's projected for 4% ownership. So that doesn't stand out as something that is like wrong. It's more I'm getting to him because of other things in my process that are bumping him up. But if you're just running like if you're just creating lineups and trying to see like who's going underowned, he doesn't really pop out uh the way that Yainer Diaz does. So I am a little concerned about the ownership projections on Houston. I do think there's a decent chance that like this 8% ownership projected for Yainer Diaz ends up being 12, 13, 14%, somewhere in that range. I'm getting to about 10 in the lineups I'd be playing, and then pretty spread out amongst the rest of the catchers. Cal Raleigh obviously has power. Shea Langoliers has power against a pitcher in Arrighetti that is going to be popular, that does give up home runs. The park sucks, but I mean, we've seen all season long, but especially lately, Oakland's not a great team overall. They have a lot of power. They are certainly capable of doing damage when they're making contact. So I'm never upset about getting to them at low ownership. William Contreras getting 12% ownership. Milwaukee in general and Contreras specifically, I do think are interesting DraftKings plays because we're getting them at a discount compared to where they normally are. 5,100 for Contreras is a pretty cheap price tag. We haven't gotten to their positions yet, but Bryce Turang and Willy Adames are cheap as well. That probably will pull up ownership a little bit, though, in an okay but not great matchup against Javier Assad. So I'm not getting to as much Contreras as the field right now. Again, I'm just getting to more Real Muto, getting to more Patrick Bailey. I don't mind any of that. Moving over to first base, Bryce Harper at the top. Again, correlates with Real Muto. I mentioned it that I'm getting to a lot of Philly. Charles Kelly said, hate to do this, but fade the Phillies. If you mean because of weather, maybe. I don't know what that forecast is going to look like by the time we get there. If you mean in terms of am I doing it? Clearly not right now, at least. Harper, I even though he's a lefty against Ober, and Ober does give up a bit less power to lefties, it's still Bryce Harper. He did grade out well for me in my pitch type model, so I like that. He's not getting a lot of ownership right now. There are plenty of other hitters on this slate that are expensive and going to pull ownership. Shohei Ohtani, Rafael Devers in Coors, Yordan Alvarez for the Astros. You can obviously only get Bobby Witt's on this slate. Ellie De La Cruz is on the slate. Not getting a ton of ownership, but he is there and expensive. Obviously, you can only allocate so much ownership to these guys priced around 6K. So Bryce Harper looks like a spot where I'm happy to be taking a stand if his ownership stays where it is. Lamont Wade, very fairly priced, nice park upgrade, going up against the guy making his major league debut for the Dodgers. So no issues with that at virtually no ownership. Dominic Smith, not in the lineup for the Red Sox. I guess I'll just touch on it now because it's a pretty natural spot to do it. I had projected the lefties in for the Red Sox. I was hoping that's what they were going to do. Austin Gomber's not very good against lefties. He's actually given up more power to lefties than righties this year. So I was hoping that we were going to get a Red Sox lineup that had Dominic Smith starting, that had Wilyer Abreu starting, that had David Hamilton starting. We did not. So we got Rob Refsnyder, who was scratched yesterday. He's back in the lineup today. He's hitting second. Romy Gonzalez is starting at first base and hitting seventh. Jamie Westbrook is batting ninth, starting at second base. These guys are almost certainly not going to finish the game, but they are probably going to get some ownership because they are affordable. They're in Coors Field. The Red Sox as a whole are one of the most appealing stacks on the slate. So if we had gotten those lefties starting, the pinch hit risk really goes down. But because we didn't, as soon as a right-handed reliever comes into this game, Dominic Smith is most likely hitting for Romy Gonzalez. Wilyer Abreu is most likely hitting for Rob Refsnyder, and David Hamilton is most likely hitting for Jamie Westbrook, or at least hitting for whichever of those guys happens. Like they're going to get pinch hit for as they come up against righties. Who actually pinch hits for who doesn't matter. But you have Smith that is a first baseman, very easy to replace Gonzalez. You have Abreu, who's an outfielder, very easy to replace Refsnyder. You have Hamilton, who's a middle infielder, very easy to replace Westbrook. So there is legitimate pinch hit risk for all of those guys. I think they're the most likely ones to get pinch hit for. You don't have to worry about Connor Wong getting pinch hit for. You certainly don't have to worry about Tyler O'Neill getting pinch hit for. You probably don't have to worry about Ceddanne Rafaela getting pinch hit for. So it's these other three that I'm worried about. And from an overall strategy standpoint, Stephen Leibowitz just said it. I think Boston mini stacks now become really, really interesting because it's so hard to 5-man stack them. If you wanted the 5-man like Duran, Wong, Devers, O'Neill, Yoshida, or Rafaela, some combination of those 6, great. Makes a lot of sense. I have no issue with that. But a large percentage of the 5-man Red Sox stacks that people are going to play in tournaments are going to have some form of Refsnyder, probably pretty frequently. Gonzalez, Westbrook, less frequently, but still in there. And then you're just probably not getting those last, 1 to 2 at bats. And it's not that like guys always get pinch hit for. If the Red Sox score 10 runs in the first inning, they're probably not going to bother matching up later in the game. But you're probably going to get ownership here. It would be one thing if these Red Sox, platoon guys were just going to be like 3% owned. Then I'd be inclined to say, I'll take these cheap guys that are in cores that positively correlate with these really good hitters and hope that for one reason or another, they don't get pitch hit for. But they're probably going to be relatively popular, especially Ref Snyder. So I like the idea of either just grabbing like Duran, Wong, Devers and moving on, or O'Neill or whoever you like of these guys that isn't going to get pitch hit for, or just grabbing, 5 of the 6 that are not likely to get pitch hit for. I do think you need to be really cautious of the pinch hit risk for the Red Sox and then just hope that they don't do damage in their first couple of at-bats. So that is something that is different than what I had projected, what I had run before this show. So obviously won't be playing Dominic Smith. Andrew Vaughn going up against Michael Lorenzen. I think it's a pretty interesting spot. He is getting some ownership, getting 9%, showed up in 8% of the lineups I'd be playing. Lorenzen doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. He does give up power, particularly to right-handed hitters. This is a good park for home runs in general. So Andrew Vaughn, I think the field's pretty much got it right. I think he looks pretty good. Spencer Steer showing up for me just gives you some home run and stolen base upside. Multi-position eligibility negatively correlates with a 20% owned Reynaldo Lopez. I don't think he's a super high probability play, but in non-Lopez lineups, if Steer shows up, fine. He does have a nice ceiling. Same goes for Candelario here on Cincinnati. Rhys Hoskins getting ownership. Again, I like Milwaukee here because of their pricing, but the field's projected to as well. And so I'm just not getting to them quite as much as projected. If their ownership were to come down, I would certainly like to get to them at those salaries, but as is, just kind of having difficulty getting to them. Nathaniel Lowe, 3,400, another just value bat that is probably going to be pretty popular, projected for about 10% ownership. Going up against Fetty, good park for power. Again, I think Lowe's a perfectly fine play, good point per dollar play, but the ownership's just a little bit higher than I would like when I have these other alternatives I can go to. Like from a range of outcome standpoint, Lamont Wade is exactly the same as Nathaniel Lowe. Obviously, these other guys are a little bit more expensive, but Dominic Smith, when I ran this, was somebody that was projected for half the ownership of Lowe, and I was getting to. So I do think that there's plenty of pivots off of Lowe if you want to save ownership there. At second base, this one, I understand. You can see why it's happening. I don't love it, but I'm getting to a lot of these punt second base plays. And I think what it is just that, as we saw, I am prioritizing Bryce Harper in this set of lineups. I'm getting to a lot of, say, Real Muto at catcher. I think I'm probably getting to some expensive guys at other positions. And second base just isn't that strong of a position today. If you look down, these other names, yeah, there's some good players, but there's nobody that I am super concerned about not having. Like Altuve would probably be the guy that I'm most concerned I don't have a lot of, but he's getting 10% ownership. He's in a park where it's tough to hit home runs. Hopefully he just, flies out a couple times to the warning track and I'm good. So I think that it's a positional thing here. I'm getting to a lot of Brooks Baldwin. I'm getting to a lot of Justin Foscue. They're both just min salary second baseman. It has nothing really to do with them. Baldwin does give you stolen base upside, but Michael Lorenzen is good at controlling the running game. So I don't really think it's a great spot for Baldwin or anything. This just has a lot to do with what the rest of my lineups look like. It doesn't have to do with these guys specifically. So they are players that very easily could fall off for me if I start getting to cheaper stacks. But with the stacks that I'm getting to right now, paying up for these Philly guys in particular, I think punting second base is perfectly fine. And I do like that they're not getting ownership. Like you're going to see ownership coming into value guys that don't really have a lot of home run upside, certainly don't have a ton of stolen base upside. Adam Frazier, Andrew Benintendi. I think these guys are going to be getting some ownership today. And, if that's who people are going to use for value, I'm fine just punting a weak second base position and hoping that I get lucky with one of these guys. Outside of them, Bryce Turang getting 9% ownership, showed up about 12% of the time for me. I mentioned him when we talked about Contreras and Hoskins, but he is just a bit cheaper than we're used to. It's not the best matchup against Assad, but it's not a terrible matchup either. I think he's a good value at second base. Tyro Estrada not getting any ownership correlates with the other Giants guys that I've already been getting to, like Bailey and Wade. So I'm not really surprised to see him. I don't mind getting some Jonathan India at no ownership. Again, it looks like Cincinnati, just kind of an offense that I'm not getting tons of, but that I am using a little bit as a negative correlation stack against Reynaldo Lopez. They do have some good hitters in their lineups in their lineup, obviously. So India at basically no ownership, I think is fine. At third base, I would hope that I'm getting to Rafael Devers. I'm getting to him around the field, showing up as my third highest owned third baseman. Alec Baum, 16% of the lineups that I would be playing, 3% ownership. I mentioned it before when talking about Philly, but Ober gives up power to righties. Alec Boehm grades out well in my pitch type / location model, and he's not getting any ownership. So I just like getting to this talented Philadelphia team at virtually no ownership. If their ownership comes up, then obviously they start getting walked back a little bit. Paul DeJong, value play at third base, does have some power from the right side against Lorenzen. He's not really projected for any ownership either. So I do think he's another guy that you can kind of throw into that bucket where, if people are going to go to Benintendi, they're going to go to Adam Frazier. I think that getting to like Paul DeJong at a lot less ownership is fine. Yeah, so I don't think it's a great play or anything, but he does have power from the right side. He is cheap. He's going to open some other stuff up for me. Rafael Devers, lefty. I mentioned it earlier, but no reason to be concerned about that. Devers is just a really good hitter overall, obviously, but Gomber also isn't lights out against lefties by any stretch. Joey Ortiz, cheap, 3,700, not really getting ownership. I do think he's an interesting way to get to Milwaukee. If you are stacking Milwaukee, maybe you include Joey Ortiz instead of one of the more popular guys, and that's a way that you can differentiate within the Milwaukee stacks. Alex Bregman getting 14% ownership, probably going to be neck and neck with Devers for your most popular third baseman today. Good matchup against Hogan Harris, very fair price tag at 4,200. I'm getting to him, just not quite as much as the field. Again, playing a little bit of Alec Baum as a way to be contrarian, playing Paul DeJong as pivots kind of a little bit more expensive, a little bit less expensive than Bregman. He's probably in cash games, it's probably Devers or Bregman. I haven't built a cash lineup, but I would assume that one of those guys is your cash third baseman. But in tournaments, I have no issue just looking to differentiate a little bit. Again, hope that Bregman just flies out to the warning track a couple times. Josh Smith showing up around the field, Matt Chapman showing up around the field. Nothing that looks too interesting elsewhere. Not really getting to a kind of popular Chris Taylor. Dylan Moore getting some ownership. I didn't really get there. Adam Frazier, I didn't get any. Yeah, he's projected for 11% ownership. He's another one where, if you're different elsewhere in your lineup, it's fine. He's a good point per dollar value. Maybe he shows up in cash games if you have to pay down. But again, I think you're probably getting to one of Bregman or Devers. But he's just not somebody that's overly likely to put up a score that you can't match from anybody else. His range of outcomes isn't crazy good for his salary or anything. He does have a good median projection, with Kansas City having a relatively high implied run total, going up against a pitcher that has made 6 total career appearances above AA. But he's just somebody that I would like more in cash games, or if he were lower owned, but he's not really low owned, so I'm not getting him, and that's perfectly fine with me. At shortstop, obviously this ownership on Hamilton is wrong because he is not playing. But Trey Turner shouldn't surprise anybody. Getting to a lot of him. Again, this reiterates why you were seeing me get to Paul DeJong, why you're seeing me get to Baldwin, why you're seeing me get to Foscue. As a overall reminder, anytime you look at a DFS player's exposures and who they played, remember that everything goes hand in hand. So if you are trying to learn from people and you see that somebody, for example, played 20% Baldwin, there's a very good chance that they didn't see anything in him that the field didn't see. The field didn't overlook anything, or that DFS player didn't see anything that they loved. But everything goes hand in hand. So in my case, if I'm going to play 22% $6,200 Trey Turner while also playing 35% or whatever it was, $5,800 Bryce Harper, and a lot of times they're going to be in the same lineups. You also have Schwarber, you also have Real Muto. I'm going to need to be cutting costs somewhere, and second base is just the position where that's working out for me tonight. So again, everything just goes hand in hand exposure-wise. Ezekiel Tovar, I think, is an interesting one on the other side of the Coors game. Tanner Houck, projected for about 20% ownership. He is a very good pitcher, but this is still Coors Field. It is still the best place to hit in baseball, certainly on the slate. So Tovar at 6% owned, I think, is pretty interesting. Getting 2x the field on Elly De La Cruz, never going to be upset about that, even though Ronaldo Lopez also not good at holding runners. So that sets up nicely for De La Cruz. Not that he really needs advantageous matchups to steal bases, but this is one for him. So happy to get to him. And again, if I'm paying for a lot of De La Cruz, paying for a lot of Turner, going to have to be cutting costs somewhere. Jeremy Pena, I think, looks like a good value at shortstop. He's one of the guys that I mentioned. I wouldn't be surprised if his actual ownership ends up being a bit higher than projected. Corey Seager getting a lot of ownership at shortstop. Pretty clearly a good play. It's Corey Seager. He's 5K. He's in Texas. All that looks good. Bobby Witt Jr., same thing. I'm getting right around the field on him, going up against an inexperienced pitcher. So I am paying up a lot at shortstop, it looks like, between Turner, De La Cruz, Seager, Witt. Rafaela, I think, is a way to be somewhat contrarian within your Red Sox stacks. His projected ownership probably goes up a little bit now that David Hamilton isn't starting. If you noticed when I first switched over to the shortstop position, 15% projected ownership was coming into Hamilton. That obviously is gone now. So Rafaela's might come up a little bit. Arcathelza said, isn't Murphy one of the best catchers against stolen bases? It doesn't really matter that much. Generally, you're stealing bases on pitchers, not on catchers. So Lopez is teams run on Lopez. He's not good at preventing it. Teams go for it. Catchers don't matter nearly as much as pitchers do when it comes to predicting stolen bases. Willy Adames getting a bunch of ownership. I'm getting about half the field, and he's another one on that Milwaukee team that just very clearly is underpriced. And so you're going to just see their ownership come in probably a little bit higher than warranted from a range of outcome standpoint, but they do project well from a median standpoint. And then getting into the outfield now, interested to see where I'm getting to on, getting a lot of Schwarber. So again, another guy I'm paying up for. He's showing up about 30% for me, Fields at 6%. This is just me being very willing to take a stand on one of the best offenses in baseball at no ownership on a slate where I think most of the offenses are similar. Again, Houston stands out, Boston stands out, but they have their own issues. Houston has issues because they're in Oakland. And then every other offense is kind of, Milwaukee looks good, but they're popular as well, just because they're a little bit underpriced. So I think there's so many similar offenses today. I am perfectly fine just getting my money down on a Phillies team that has a 110 WRC plus on their active roster against right-handed pitching. So you're seeing that with Schwarber. Obviously, Tyler O'Neill looks great. 14% projected ownership. Probably going to be higher if you're playing high-stakes, small field stuff. So that's something that I would keep in mind, pay attention to. But in your large field, probably going to be, in this like 15%, maybe 20% range. I don't think that's a problem. Obviously, I want to get to him. I'm a little surprised I'm getting to Benintendi, but it does correlate with the other players that I'm playing. So again, everything kind of, working together. Individually, I don't love Benintendi if you're just saying like, oh, well, I'm going to stack the really popular or really expensive, rather, Red Sox or whatever team, and then I'm going to play like an Andrew Benintendi one-off. That's not really that interesting. I like it more if you do get like Benintendi plus Vaughn plus DeYoung or something. Baldwin obviously fits into that as well. Luis Robert would be another option, although obviously he's not cheap. So I think that's why I'm getting to a bit more Benintendi than the field, is that he is probably mixed in with some of those other White Sox bats that I'm getting to against Lorenzen. Jorge Soler, obvious power upside, nice park upgrade for him. Unproven pitcher in River Ryan, getting around 2x the field there. JJ Bleday against Arrighetti. I mentioned it earlier that, Arrighetti is a pitcher that does struggle with power at times and, will put guys on base. I like getting to Bleday here at a $3,800 price tag. He has some power. He does grade out well in my pitch type model also. So does Brent Rooker. They're both very close to the top of that. Rooker, though, obviously quite a bit more expensive. Actually, Rooker, I thought it was. Rooker apparently is not at the top of that list. But Bleday is for me. So I like getting to him. Think he's a good contrarian play, not getting much ownership, offers value. Heliot Ramos, again, I'm getting to the Giants a good amount, so he positively correlates with that. Yoshida, lefty. I'm around the field on him. I'm a little bit over on Jake Myers. I think Myers is an interesting way, assuming he's in the lineup for Houston, to get to Houston while sacrificing or not having to sacrifice ownership. So I think that, Jake Myers is an interesting value piece from Houston that isn't quite as popular as guys like Altuve and Bregman. So I think that's interesting. Same goes for McCormick. Alvarez getting ownership. I'm a little bit below the field. I obviously have more Schwarber and O'Neill in that price range at similar ownership in O'Neill's case, a lot less in Schwarber's case. Lawrence Butler, 7% projected ownership. I don't think this is a slate. We've seen it a lot lately with Butler where the ownership projections are just wrong on him because he's been playing really well lately. And I think people are just happy to click his name. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think this is a slate where that's really likely to happen. Oakland isn't likely to be a very popular team. The pitcher against Butler is going to be popular. You have 101 outfielders that look really good. So I think we probably do actually get relatively low-owned Butler today, which looks pretty nice. So then to just recap the stacks that I was getting to as well from a five-man standpoint, getting to San Francisco a lot. I like the park upgrade. I like the lack of ownership. They offer some value as well. Philadelphia, Boston, Houston, um, my highest owned five-mans. I'm curious to see what some of these Houston stacks look like as far as ownership goes. Alvarez, Bregman. So I like this. Um, even though Bryce Terang's probably going to have some ownership, from a like combinations standpoint, this is still a pretty contrarian lineup because such a high percentage of five-man Houston stacks are going to be plugging in Altuve here. Going to Turang, even though his actual ownership projection is pretty high, he's just not going to be utilized in lineups like this all that often. So I think that's actually a way to be contrarian while still getting to a relatively popular player. Singleton and Myers not projected for as much ownership as the rest of these Astros. So I think that's fine. Adames, Yelich, Turang, three-man. I think that's a perfectly fine team. Here, same thing. We don't have Altuve. We paid down to Baldwin and then used basically the Altuve money on Schwarber/Harper. So I think that is a good approach. That's another green Arrighetti lineup. So we also have positive correlation with Arrighetti and the Houston offense. No Altuve here. Went down to Dubon. Paid up for Bohm. Paid up for Harper. So I like that. No Bregman in this one either. So this is a five-man Houston stack that doesn't have Bregman or Altuve. Obviously, you are sacrificing some upside within that Houston stack, but you're making up for it by getting to Alec Baum and Bryce Harper, JT Realmuto. Like, you can't look at this lineup and say it doesn't have upside just because it doesn't have Bregman and Altuve. The money, the salaries are just allocated differently, which is going to make this a contrarian stack, even though it is Houston. And then here, a similar one, very similar one. I'm actually surprised that that happened. And then here we have Snell, Lopez, Bregman, Pena, and the Astros outfield with, again, a two-man Philadelphia stack. So I actually don't love how much kind of overlap I'm getting with Houston and Philly, but I do like individually any of those lineups, the way that they are showing up. TTID Forever said, I got here late. Is this a day where we would want to take Snell or stack the Dodgers? I personally right now have a ton of Snell. He was my second highest owned pitcher. So I do think, and I didn't really talk about this with Snell, if you're not playing Snell, getting to the Dodgers makes all the sense in the world, because if you're not playing Snell, you are ignoring a $7,500 pitcher that has some of the best strikeout ability on the slate. For Snell not to get there, it's to not give you a good game at 7,500, he probably kind of has to get lit up because the strikeouts are pretty much always there. So it does strike me as a game where, a lot of times you can just kind of say, yeah, I'm just going to not really play either side. It does strike me as a game where I would like to be getting different sides, or at least be taking stands on something, because Snell ceiling is so high for a $7,500 price tag. The Dodgers offense is so good, and Snell will get some ownership at least. Like, there's just so much upside there. I'd like to be on one side. For me personally, it looks like it's going to be Snell. And that also does kind of go to the Giants as well, who I'm getting to, going up against a highly regarded pitching prospect who is inexperienced. Like, if this guy, he's 7K. If he comes up and the cheap Giants don't have a good game, there's a pretty good chance that 7K River Ryan ends up being a decent option. He's gone 4 or 5 innings in each of his last 3 starts. I'm not playing him, but I am getting to the Giants against him in a park upgrade. So that's a game overall that just has a lot of upside. I like getting different pieces of it. In my case, I think Snell is likely to be where I'm ending up. So yeah, those are the 5-mans I'm getting to. 4-mans, the White Sox showing up a good amount. Again, I don't like them, but they are cheap. You can get very good lineups around them. If we look at what those look like, Corey Lee, Vaughn, Baldwin, Benintendi, like, those guys are not exciting, but you're also getting Devers, O'Neill, Yoshida, and Bobby Witt. So you're getting 4 of the best individual hitters around them. Vaughn, Baldwin, Pham, Benintendi with O'Neill and the Phillies 3-man. The point here is, the White Sox suck, but Michael Lorenzen's one of the worst pitchers on the slate from a talent standpoint. It is a good park to hit in, and you're just getting loaded lineups around the White Sox, and they're low owned. If they were popular, I wouldn't want anything to do with them. I would find another cheap team to get to, but they are cheap. They have a relatively high implied run total compared to where they're normally at, which generally is going to make a team underpriced as well. So, yeah, I'm not sitting here advocating for putting all your money on the White Sox or anything, but you can see, how those lineups do look pretty appealing. I can take a look at. I've kind of done it as I was going through position by position, but any players that I am not getting to in case I missed any. If these except these numbers look like they are not. Yeah, these numbers are completely messed up, so that way is not going to work. If I sort by ownership, not really getting the Miller. Talked about that. Reagans, how Hamilton's not playing. Not getting to a lot of Bregman, which I talked about, is fine. Um, I guess I need to unstack these. That is what the problem was. Yeah, so now I can sort by leverage. Yeah, Miller, Reagans, Hamilton obviously is not playing, so that doesn't matter. Not getting to a lot of Hauk. Frazier, I talked about. Not getting too much Lorenzen. He's another one where if he lands in some lineups, whatever he's facing the White Sox, it's not like you're wrong. He's basically Tyler Anderson. It's the same play as Tyler Anderson. Bailey Ober getting some ownership. I'm obviously on the Phillies. Shohei Ohtani, the ownership's come down a little bit since this morning, but again, if he's gonna get 11% ownership, not to directly compare these guys, but I can save a little bit of money and get a lower owned player by going to Bryce Harper, by going to Schwarber, by going to Ellie De La Cruz. I'm perfectly fine doing that. Talked about Lowe. There's a lot of alternatives at first base. Freddie Freeman, obviously, I'm just getting a lot of Snell. That's pulling back on him a little bit. So those are the guys I'm not getting to, the popular guys at least, I'm not getting to the most. How's Tyler Anderson at holding runners? Let me see. I have him as slightly above average at preventing stolen bases. Not to the extent that I would be like not playing guys against him that steal, but it's not a great spot. I did glad you mentioned Robles batting second. I do think Victor Robles is really interesting. I don't think that I got to a lot of him, but he was one of the lineup spots that I wanted to pay attention to. Yeah, I didn't really get to the Mariners in general. I did have Rodriguez projected in, so that obviously that lineup just is wrong. Robles is starting in center field. So that does make his pinch hit risk a little bit lower. Now, Luke Raley has played 26 innings in center field this year. He's not in the starting lineup. So there is the potential, depending how this game goes, for Robles to be pinch hit for. I think it's very likely that late in this game, if the Mariners are losing and Robles comes up in like the seventh, eighth inning, that you see Luke Raley hit for him. But if the Mariners are winning, I think Robles probably bats for himself because they would rather him be playing center field from a defensive standpoint than Luke Raley. So I do think that there is still pinch hit risk on Robles. But if he were like for some reason batting second and Julio Rodriguez were in and Robles is playing like left field or DHing or something, there would be way, way, way more pinch hit risk. So I do think he looks a little bit better because he is playing center field than he normally would. There is still some pinch hit risk there, but not as much as there would be if he weren't playing center field. So he is a pretty good value. He's somebody that maybe I get a little bit more of once I rerun everything with him batting second because that wasn't the projected lineup that I used. But I did want to point that out where like if you compare him to Rob Refsnyder, I think Refsnyder has more pinch hit risk than Robles does. Especially because you could also like depending where there ends up being a high leverage spot in the Mariners lineup. Let's say Mitch Garver is up with second and third, 2 outs in like the sixth inning, and the Angels bring in a right-handed reliever. That could end up being Luke Raley as the DH. There's nothing stopping that. Or if it's Dylan Moore, that could be Luke Raley. If it's Mitch Haniger, that could be Luke Raley. So it also doesn't have to be Robles that Raley were to hit for. So I don't think he has nearly as much pinch hit risk as somebody like Refsnyder or as he would if he weren't playing center field. So I do think he's an interesting value bat hitting second. And if he's not very popular, I would actually like him as a value play. Maybe some of my Benintendi, for example, were to turn into him. I would not be upset at all about that. Maybe some of my Baldwin at second base turns into him, although obviously paying down in the outfield does come with more opportunity cost than at second base. But that's all I have for you on this show. If there's no more questions, I'll stick around for a little bit longer just to make sure that there aren't. But again, thank you for checking out the show. Stephen Leibowitz said I'll play Castellanos. Interesting stat on him. He's one of 2 players whose bat speed has increased every month, him and Duran. That's interesting. That's a stat that I don't look at regularly that I probably should. Obviously, just a newer stat that I'm not like checking out of habit yet. But yeah, that is interesting. I think it's an interesting stat too, and then I wonder. I obviously haven't tested it, but I'd be interested in knowing if like there's any way that you can kind of predict hot or cold streaks a little bit better using it than simply saying like this guy hasn't gotten a hit in a week. That obviously is not really predictive going forward. But like if you can say his bat speed's way down, it's probably more likely that he's got some sort of mechanical issue or an injury that he's playing through. So that would be something that I don't know if somebody smarter than me wants to test out. I'd be interested in the results there. But yeah, that's an interesting stat that his bat speed's been increasing. Alvin said, got here late, best stacks and pitchers on DraftKings. I mean, you can rewind the video, but I'm getting to a lot of Hunter Green and Blake Snell as far as pitching goes. Getting to a lot of Phillies right now. Weather could derail that one for me. Getting to a lot of Boston, but I talked at length about that one. I would go back and watch that. Yeah, I'm pretty spread out on stacks. Philadelphia is the spot where I'd really be taking a stand right now, but obviously weather could mess that up. Neil said Adam doesn't do dong picks. Normally, I just forget. I did actually put together something for home runs using my pitch type model that I forget to update because I don't know. I just always forget to do it. I will go with Alec Baum home run off of Ober. Yeah, that's definitely far enough off the board. He's like 3% owned, so I'll go there for the dong pick. But yeah, that's all I have for you. Thanks again for checking out the show. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, all that stuff. Check out Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below if you haven't already. We have a bunch of good stuff up on the site, a lot more good stuff to come. We also have our July monthly roundtable coming up in the next week or so. So great time to subscribe, have access to that Q&A with Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tanner, and myself. Check that out. Links in the description below. Nick said, is there any ownership on the Diamondbacks? I wouldn't think so. Cole Reagan's going to be one of the more popular pitchers today. Diamondbacks don't have a particularly high implied run total. I don't think, yeah, they're not going to be popular. If you want to use them as a negatively correlated stack, okay, but I didn't get to them. Yeah, so it looks like all the questions. That's all I got for you. Same time tomorrow, 5 p.m. for the tournament show, 11 a.m. for the game-by-game overview in the morning. Thanks again. Good luck on your lineups tonight.